Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We've got the Clallam EDC coffee chat with our elected director of community development, Bruce Emery, joining us on the Coffee with Colleen this morning. So excited to hear about all the work he and his team have been doing on the comprehensive plan update, which is once every 10 years, they have to go through this humongous process that uh, which is on top of their normal workload of approving permits and planning documents, etc. So it's a huge undertaking that I don't think the state really funds. So that and part of what is being looked at is RV code that I know has been a really big issue in our county. So really, I'm very thankful, Bruce, for you joining us today and allowing everyone to ask questions about it. So just a few housekeeping items first before I pass it over to Bruce. If you want to ask a question, you can either put the question in the chat and we will ask it on your behalf, or alternatively, if you prefer to ask the question yourself, please raise your hand and at an appropriate point, we will get to your question. I just want to make sure everyone remains really civil. That's very important for this forum and for presenters being willing to come and talk. I know many of these issues are controversial, so anytime there's change with land use code, it's always the case, and we appreciate Bruce Emery coming on to do this. So and we will mute you if had one person swear at Congressman Kilmer once, and so that didn't work out well and had to mute them, but hopefully nothing like that. And so we're excited to have this opportunity for Bruce to present and have people ask particular questions. I know there are a lot of questions. So with that, Bruce, I'll let you take it away and go ahead and present.
Thank you very much, Colleen. I appreciate that. As Colleen mentioned, I'm Bruce Emery. I'm the Director of Community Development for Clallam County. We provide the regulatory programs that affect unincorporated Clallam County outside of city limits, including urban growth areas, resource lands, and our rural landscape. I'm going to go ahead and can I do the screen share at this point?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, just a second here. And do you see the screen now?
Yes, and we see the next slide as well.
Oh, you do? Well, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Let me try this again.
Go to display settings and then click swap view. Right
Go to what setting?
Yeah, display settings. Click on that and then swap view.
How's that?
Perfect.
There you go. Perfect.
Excellent. Well, I'll get right into the meat of it. We're here to talk about RV use and more in particular, long-term RV occupancy. The state L&I tells us, the Department of Labor and Industries, who regulates the manufacturing of recreational vehicles in Washington state, RVs are typically short-term occupancy structures. Obviously, they're mobile. And they take various forms. You know, you have your recreational vehicle, which is, you know, it's standalone under its own power. You have travel trailers. You have park models. We already adopted a standard for the placement of park models since they don't have their own holding tanks or anything. Typically, they are placed more or less in a permanent location. But in all cases, L&I's recommendation is that RVs are designed to only be occupied for 180 days in any 12-month period. So having said that, you know, what we do know is that RV occupancy of RVs continues to kind of expand in Clallam County as well across the state and even our nation. Clallam County already has a regulatory program addressing long-term RV use. Under our ADU standards, accessory dwelling unit standards, the duration of occupancy is limited to no more than 90 consecutive days for an RV placed in the same location. It's kind of squirrely. What does it mean? It means, well, you could drive it off the site for a day or two, bring it back, and chances are you'd be compliant. But the intent is clear, no more than 90 consecutive days. And that otherwise, and in the language of the code, otherwise it violates our accessory dwelling unit standards. We also have the definition of what constitutes a recreational vehicle park. And that includes a campground for day use and overnight accommodations by motor homes, travel trailers, truck campers, and camping trailers. Well, what does that mean? Because it utilizes plural in referring to recreational vehicles, it means two or more. So we basically have a regulatory program that says no more than 90 consecutive days if you have a residence. It's silent when it comes to vacant property. And if you have two or more, that is technically a recreational vehicle park. That means you have to get a binding site plan, and it only is allowed in certain zones. So there's a lot of restrictions that apply to siting and actually getting approval of recreational vehicle parks. We certainly recognize recreational vehicle parks that predate the current regulation as lawfully established, non-conforming, or vested recreational vehicle parks. Under our vacation rental standards, a vacation rental has to be a dwelling. And by definition, that does not include recreational vehicles. Title 41, which is our environmental health code, requires that if an RV is being occupied for more than 30 days, sewage disposal and potable water supply has to be addressed. Now that can take many forms. Producing vouchers showing that you're properly dumping your sewage at an approved site is one method, but it depends on the Environmental Health Division and how that gets applied. Also, we have a critical areas ordinance. Regardless of whether you're occupying the RV or not, you have to observe buffers. You cannot trample buffers. So citing an RV for long-term occupancy within a critical area or its buffer does violate the code. So, and lastly, recreational vehicles are not currently defined well in our zoning code. We do in the definition for RV park as is printed on the screen here. But what it means is we've got sort of a hodgepodge of regulations that apply. So the clarity isn't 100%, but we do know this. People are using them, they're relying on them.
Yeah, so all of that is current code.
Yes.
And we all know that people in the lower wage brackets are using RVs for their primary living dwelling. And so how are you trying to manage that given the reality of, state code that makes it next to impossible to build affordably and what the needs are of our community across our county?
That is precisely the reason we chose to undertake this. We have a code that isn't clear. We don't know what to tell people over the counter because it's silent if the property is vacant. If the property already has a house, we have to tell them you can only occupy it for no more than 90 consecutive days. That's what the code says. It needs to be changed. And in the words of Commissioner Johnson, it's untenable. So what is the current need? People are using recreational vehicles for residential occupancy out of necessity, whether it's economic necessity, needing to care for a parent or a family member or a friend. There's regulatory inconsistency. It's restricted if a home is present, but silent if the parcel is vacant. And there's a need to remove limits on duration of occupancy as long as we're addressing life safety issues and provide clarity of what the regulation means. So this was generally our purpose moving ahead with this and undertaking this as a code update issue. I wanted to provide this passage. This was in the memorandum that I sent to the Planning Commission initially when we undertook this task of updating the code concerning recreational use occupancy. Use of recreational vehicles as an alternative means of housing has been occurring in Clallam County and across our state with increased frequency. The reasons are many and varied, but the circumstance is primarily driven by a substantial increase in the price of housing and reduced production of new affordable housing stock. In short, many are resorting to alternative housing situations such as unit sharing and use of non-traditional housing units. Along with this increase in residential use of RVs are the emergence of collateral issues, including aesthetic impacts, problems related to sewage disposal, critical area impacts, and solid waste disposal issues, to name a few. There exists a clear need to strike the right balance between protecting communities from the issues related to uncontrolled proliferation of residential RV use and the need to recognize its necessity to many county citizens for whom better alternatives are simply not available or attainable. Human compassion demands reasonable compromise. So we undertook this task, and in doing so, attempted to address several issues. Number one, what do we call it? We needed clear definitions. So we provided draft definitions for recreational vehicles, recreational vehicle parks, tiny house and tiny house on wheels, because they tend to get confused in this whole discussion. And there are very clear distinctions, at least at the state level, as to what constitutes a tiny home on wheel. Primarily, they're built to building code standard by definition. So we wanted to update that so there was clarity in what it means. We also wanted to take a look at vacation rentals. Vacation rentals currently, you're allowed to have one on a residential piece of property, and you can use an accessory dwelling unit, or you can use a primary residence as long as you're not using both. And the key there was the standard wanted to reflect the need to keep the investment in this type of operation local and to avoid kind of proliferation of investment strategies from larger corporations wanting to proliferate that across the landscape. So that remained an option, but it had to be stick built. What we wanted to take a look, though, since we already have an a park model RV placement requirement, whether or not they could be used for short-term rentals. They're designed for short-term occupancy. They're placed permanently on the property. And our thinking was maybe this would allow something of a release valve to reduce the demand for available housing stock by people simply wanting to establish a short-term rental. So we decided we would, go ahead.
Bruce, in the county, unincorporated county, you have to have 1.5 acres to have an ADU. Are you
Correct.
saying that if you have 1 acre of property, or half, which would be probably, anyway, not fairly unusual, if you had 1 acre, could you put a park model on there or an RV and use it as a short-term rental?
Right now you can't. It has to be a stick built, so it would require 1.5 acres. Our proposal is to allow, by allowing park models as short-term rentals, you would be able to do that on a 1 acre parcel.
Okay, and what about
they're
an
not
RV?
bound by the ADU standard. They have their own set of criteria that do not require compliance or consideration as an accessory dwelling unit.
What about one RV?
Well, RVs are not included in this proposal.
Okay.
We want to take baby steps, and there's a reason behind that, which I will get to. This one is more or less testing the waters if we can do it.
Okay.
And if we can, great. It provides expanded opportunity, not only economic opportunity, but as I said, may provide a bit of a relief valve so that we're not exacerbating demand for limited housing stock.
Got it. So Sean has a question in the chat. If there is PUD water available, the 1.5 acre rule does not apply, correct? For ADUs.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So we also wanted to clarify life safety issues. Again, the code currently under Title 41 does require for long-term occupancy of an RV to hook up to sewage disposal or have some approved means. Our goal here was to create clarity within the zoning code. So all you have to do is look at it and you know what to do. And this would be addressed in the new regulation that we proposed. We did propose eliminating the 90-day restriction on occupancy so that we're no longer in the business of having to regulate that. It's a challenge, number one, to prove, but number two, it does give what I believe to be a false impression to like a neighbor who might be aggrieved by someone living in an RV next to them. But in the balance of all things here, our goal was to get us out of the business of regulating occupancy. We also wanted to implement the new accessory dwelling unit standards required under the Growth Management Act. Primarily, it requires us now to allow at least 2 accessory dwelling units on properties that exist within urban growth areas. It's still silent on what is allowed in rural areas, and we want to maintain what we have in rural areas. So we're careful about the changes that we want to make to our accessory dwelling units there. But the proposed ordinance included the required changes from RCW 3670A 681. Which includes this expansion of ADU use in urban growth areas. We wanted to provide clarity of unauthorized structures for rental purposes. This would have been a new section 3340-100. It includes unpermitted structures. There's, in this, in the past few years, we've seen an increase in the number of converted sheds that never received a building permit that are now being rented either short-term or long-term and have no benefit of a building permit verifying that it meets building code for residential occupancy. That's a problem. It violates the current code. It violates not only county, but state law as well. So we wanted to provide clarity on that. I want to make it very clear, our intent here was not to regulate the normal recreational use of RVs. Nor did we want to apply any regulation to use of RVs that occur within approved or vested recreational vehicle parks. We wanted to leave that alone. That was beyond the scope and purview. What we're talking about here is what can people reasonably expect to do on their property with allowing the use of one RV. So that was the scope and intent of our purpose here. All right. So our planning commission undertook this. They spent several work sessions between the middle of February and the middle of May to consider various alternatives. They ultimately held a public hearing on June 18th last year. To receive public testimony. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of attendance at that hearing, but at the same time, there was some written submittals, and we also took a pretty extensive look at what other jurisdictions do in Western Washington, and I would say about 2/3 of them have some level of recreational vehicle use ordinance. 1/3 of them are silent. Of the ones that do have a recreational vehicle use ordinance, there's some level of duration limit. Our experience through code enforcement is that they all face challenge in terms of the enforceability of that standard, of a duration limit standard. So we're not alone in that. It's a difficult issue to prove, to demonstrate. And then lastly, do you even want to be in a position of having to evict people from the only home they can afford? So, um, and after their deliberation, they included a new section for RV placement, which actually gave criteria, and that took a look at things like, uh, uh, whether or not recreational vehicle, if you have one being occupied, should you allow a proliferation of them? And they said, no, you should really store any additional RVs out of sight, either, on the property if it can be fit within an existing barn, behind vegetation, or store it off-site. They did require not only in addition to life safety issues, but that it be hooked up to an approved electric service so that the neighbors aren't dealing with the noise from a generator, for example. And then, but they also, because of what they saw with other jurisdictions, they felt it was necessary to maintain a duration limit of 180 days per 12-month period as an occupancy limit. And that was after a full consideration of the whole broad issue.
Well, couldn't someone just move out for a day and then restart the clock?
Well, there is yes,
Yeah,
I think you probably could. A case could be made.
which is the problem for trying to regulate duration. And
Exactly.
how can
That's
you
one of
prove that they
many.
didn't move out?
That's one of many.
Mhm.
So it took a while for the ordinance to make it to the board, but the board did hold a work session on October 13th and then set a public hearing for November 10th. It was largely attended. That hearing was continued until November 24th, again with a large crowd providing testimony, and they decided at that point to keep the written testimony open and continued until January 20th. Again, at the January 20th meeting of the board, it was widely attended. There was a lot of opposition. A lot of folks did not like the ordinance. They viewed it as an increase of regulation. There was only a couple of letters of testimony from folks who actually took issue with the fact that we were expanding, allowing the occupancy of an RV. They saw that as problematic. But the vast majority, I think, believed that this represented an increase in regulation, even though, as I've described, it actually was intended to relax the current standards, make it more uniform and understandable. Based on testimony received, the board instructed us to eliminate the 180-day occupancy limit. They also agreed that we should allow for 2 recreational vehicles to be present, 1 occupied, and then to allow the second RV to be occupied through the issuance of a conditional use permit. This would give us the opportunity to review it and have the hearing examiner decide on the case, decide whether there was additional aesthetic issues or life safety issues that needed to be addressed. But through that process, we could even look at traffic generation if they were renting it or whatever.
Got it.
So it
Hey,
gave a process to allow for a second.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from
Sure.
someone. Go ahead.
Hi, Director Emery. This is Jake Seegers, and
Hi,
I
Jake.
appreciate the clarification you're offering here today. There has been some confusion along the way over the intent, but I think one of the things that's kind of become very clear is that citizens, we want to retain our property rights and even expand, because I understand some of the limitations are current code, while also providing code enforcement the authority to take care of the big problem issues in the county. And so one of the issues I think is the current limitation on 1 vacation rental per parcel, especially because there's not a size designation on that. And so folks that are maybe renting a couple bedrooms in their house or a bedroom in their house in an ADU are non-compliant, but it may be perfectly appropriate. So that's one of the issues. And then the other issue is the potential of having up to two RVs that are occupied, properly hooked up, properly taken care of, assuming that the space is there, assuming it's properly done, without being considered an RV park and without a conditional use. And I think those are two of the bigger issues that we're still understanding that's problems with current ordinance and not necessarily the expansion that you guys are trying to accomplish. And I do appreciate the Planning Commission and your time on this. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. I plan on getting to that in the next couple of slides. If we can continue through that, if there's any lingering question, I'd be happy to field it at the end of that. But it's a valid point. I will clarify this. We also allow in all residential zones bed and breakfast inns, and that includes the short-term rental of rooms. So part of this is what you call it. At the state level, let's see, it's RCW 6437 has limited regulation on short-term rentals. They do indicate they must be dwellings, but they loosely define what they mean by dwelling. That's where we kind of think we're able to sneak by, or not sneak by, I don't want to say it that way. I think that a park model does meet that definition. And that's why I think it's possible for us to do.
But an RV would not?
Huh?
But an RV would not? So you can't do a short-term rental of an RV?
I think we have a tougher burden with that.
Okay.
And I say that in part, there's an unknown here. If there were a challenge to the Growth Hearings Board, and I'll spend a little more time on that in a little bit, but I want to just touch on this. If there's a challenge with the Growth Hearings Board that, hey, you're allowing expansion of dwelling and you didn't consider density, that could be problematic because what it could do is call into question our accessory dwelling unit standard to begin with. We're actually talking about eliminating one of the controls that we have on the ADU standard by eliminating the 90-day occupancy restriction. And there was a Growth Hearings Board case in San Juan County in 2003. Now, San Juan County, up to that point, only had attached accessory dwelling unit standards. They didn't have detached. They attempted to adopt those standards. They were taken to the Growth Hearings Board in a complaint. And the Growth Hearings Board found that because their standard did not predate the Growth Management Act, they could allow detached ADUs, but they had to do it according to zoning density. So if you have R5 density zoning where there's one home per 5 acre, you would need 10 acres in order to have an ADU. And but they did, in their decision, uncharacteristically cite that those counties, those jurisdictions that had detached ADU standards prior to the adoption of the GMA were allowed to continue. The challenge is, if we're perceived as expanding that standard, it could potentially put us at risk. What I want to avoid is having the Growth Hearings Board or the state telling us what we need to do to comply. And because it could mean significant changes in the wrong direction. So I raise that. I don't have absolute certainty where the chips fall, but my sense is that the proposal we made is defensible. But to expand it to include RVs at this point, my sense is let's see what we can do with what we've proposed. And I'm completely open to picking this up later on if it looks like we're okay. I hope that explanation, I mean, that's revealing a lot, but I hope that explanation makes it a little bit clear. So back to where we are, the board giving us direction on the changes that they'd like to see made. We have made those changes to the draft ordinance. So the current status, again, there was substantial opposition to the ordinance expressed at the board meeting, especially in the public comments. The board did not take action on January 20th, but expressed concerns in response to that public opposition. So they essentially put it back on us to basically come up with a plan. I'm planning on forwarding an agenda item summary to them for discussion next Monday. And my recommendation is that we split this up into 3 different categories. And the reason for doing that is it makes it easier to explain, to focus, and so that everybody can clearly understand what the code currently says and where we'd like to go with it and what the concerns are. One would be taking the ADU standards out. This is something that is required under the Growth Management Act. We're already doing an update to the zoning code to implement changes consistent with the Growth Management Act, and we can put that in there. That's part of what the Planning Commission is currently working on as far as a recommendation with the comprehensive plan update. To take the issue of using park models as vacation rentals as a separate code issue. Again, easy to explain, easy to have a public discussion on it, and hopefully provide clarity to the public on what we intend to do there. And I believe Danelle is going to be handling that project on our behalf.
Lucky her.
Oh, go ahead. Oh,
I said
yeah.
lucky Danella.
Exactly. And then treating the RV use component to be simplified and brought back through the process. One of the things the board mentioned was whether or not the Planning Commission had interest in taking this on, given the new information from the testimony and instruction provided by the board. And they do. So our plan is to bring it back to them at some point. Right now, their slate is pretty full for the next month and a half. But after that, I think we can move this forward. So our plan is to bring it back through them and and also one of the things that received a lot of attention was these enforcement provisions under new section 3340-100. That's where we talked about non-compliant structures. And it was basically intended to provide clarity for code enforcement. But it, as in the words of Commissioner French, it was draconian. And the fact of the matter is those provisions actually exist as an operation of law anyway. It's not needed for this to move forward. So we're planning on eliminating that. And that way the discussion can be targeted and simplified so that there's clarity and we can have meaningful discussion with the public on it.
So Bruce, I've got a question. I've got a neighbor that has at least 2, sometimes 3 RVs on a vacant parcel, and they don't have a septic. So are they, and I haven't done anything about it, nor have my neighbors. It's just the 3rd one arrived fairly recently. But if they were going to be in compliance, would the owner of the property have to put in a septic that would be large enough for 2 and get a conditional use permit for the second one? Or is there some provision where they can show that they're regularly moving the gray water and black water out of the site?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Again, we crafted language concerning septic that merely required addressed sewage disposal to the satisfaction of the Environmental Health Division under Title 41. If in their discretion they say that pump receipts are sufficient, and there are cases where they do that, then that will satisfy the requirement. We didn't want to purposely set a hard and fast standard for which there may be alternatives that could be available. So it wasn't, all it did was say, you need to go talk to them. And what they determine based on their code that they administer will meet our requirement. But as far as the current proposal, to answer your other question, 1 RV, yes. As long as you're meeting sewage disposal in whatever form environmental health determines is necessary, you're allowed to occupy it. If the second one, under the current proposal, would require a conditional use permit. If the board changes their mind on that, maybe two would be allowed.
Okay.
Again, we have to be careful, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, about
Okay.
how best to
There-
proceed.
There are two more questions in the chat. Does an HOA have the ability to overrule the county requirements?
Yes. HOAs are, in addition to, they can't, let me make sure I'm careful on how I answer that. County requirement is a county requirement. You have to meet it. But if the county says, yeah, you can go ahead and do this use, but an HOA says, no, you can't, unless it's a case where a discriminatory action is occurring, and that would be determined by a court of law, civil court, outside of our purview, the rules of the HOA would apply. So they still have the ability to make their own aesthetic and operational limits.
Okay. And the next zone, I think it's more a statement here. Zoning codes are instruments, not value statement. And then the next sentence wasn't finished, it looks like. But okay. Thank you. Continue.
All
Oh,
right.
no, I just needed to scroll down. Sorry. Zoning codes are not instruments. They are instruments, not value statements. Their purpose is to protect property rights and public health through clear, consistent standards. The RV ordinance discussion highlights a deeper issue. The county code is fractured. Rules on RV use, sanitation, and enforcement are scattered and misaligned, creating uncertainty and uneven application. Before expanding allowed uses, how will DCD align these provisions into a single enforceable framework that reflects the core purpose of the code?
In the ordinance that is currently being proposed by as instructed by the board, we would achieve just that. It would provide clarity of purpose and intent and allow for a use that, in our opinion, is desperately needed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So switching over to code enforcement, because there was a lot of comment, that, hey, you're coming up with regulations and you're only going to be regulating honest people. And yet there are all these cases across the landscape where multiple RVs exist, where there's trash accumulation, where there's all these things going on. I want to make perfectly clear. Most people are conscientious, law-abiding citizens. If all people were, we wouldn't need regulation. Unfortunately, regulation really is needed for those who won't be conscientious, who won't be friendly to their neighbors, etc. Hence, we have code enforcement. Now, our code enforcement division is complaint-driven. I know that's a controversial statement, but we don't have the manpower or the budget to be able to be proactive in going out and dealing with problems across the landscape. We are dependent on people providing that information to us. Our current code enforcement cases includes 106 cases involving RVs. Of those, 93 include a combination of other violations, a lot without septic system. Now, some of them, they're pumping, they're doing what they need to, but 93 with other violations. 33 of those only require an approved sewage disposal system. Again, going back to the Environmental Health Division under Title 41 and doing something that addresses that issue. It's very important. 67 involve multiple RVs. Basically, these are unauthorized RV parks. And unless we're willing to allow that, and I can provide reasons why that may not make sense, that is something that we need to get a handle on. And you also, when you're looking at these things, you also need to think about, is that a reasonable expectation for the neighbor to sustain? Would you want your mother living next to that? And that's part of the, kind of the acid test that we in planning take when we look at these issues. So it is something that I believe does need to be addressed, and we're working on it. The code currently gives us the latitude to do it, and we're doing it. 13 of them involve occupancy duration alone. That's greater than 90 consecutive days in the same location. And when it comes to code enforcement, it requires us to engage with the property owner. In situations where there's squatters or other people living on the property, we still can only deal with the property owner. One of the cases that was raised during the public hearing was a situation out on Old Olympic Highway where there was an old fellow whose children were inhabiting RVs, and there were other things going on, drug dealing, things of that nature. A lot of trash accumulated, a lot of violation of code. The gentleman passed away. Right now, the property is under the ownership, is being held by HUD. And so we don't have a mechanism for gaining compliance through that organization. We're working on kind of legal avenues to get it taken care of. But there's other situations where title isn't clear, and so we don't have a clear person to engage with. Lastly, even when we have someone to engage with, we're not always successful at gaining compliance. In our arsenal, basically, is the ability to find someone. If they continue to violate, we take them to the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner will issue an order. Included in that order will be the authorization to establish fines for continued non-compliance. We have situations where fines do accrue, and if beyond 90 days, they get applied to the property as a lien. But we have situations where people are simply ignoring it. Their intent is that they'll just deed the property to their children, and there's currently no legal mechanism to come in and compel compliance. So it's kind of one of those very difficult situations where a problem is allowed to continue. Having said all this, we still have success stories. This is a property, and this picture was taken back in July of 2025 on property off Dry Creek Road. And obviously you have trash accumulation. You've got an RV in the front, you got a junk vehicle, you got another junk vehicle behind it. But if you look in the back, there's 4 additional RVs. People were residing in them. There was drug dealing going on, drug trafficking. There's no septic for any of those RVs. And it was very difficult, but we were able to work with the property owner. And this is the property as of November 19th of 2025. So I don't have good before and after pictures for other properties, but we are gaining on it. And there are situations like this where we have success stories. Some of them take an awful lot of time. And in devoting those resources, there's an opportunity cost, but we will be getting the job done. And my belief is, with broken window theory, the more of these we accomplish, the more we start to turn around local communities, the more those are going to be the exception than the rule. We'll be able to target them more effectively. So with that, that's my presentation on this. Are there any questions?
Yeah, so we have one comment in the chat, which I understand the frustration by this viewer. Why don't we solve the real problem and fix the housing affordability problem by reducing the ridiculous regulations pushed by the county? Now, I gotta say, I am one that is so frustrated by the cost to build, and the cost to build is driven primarily by the energy regulations that the state passed in 2006. In 2006, a law was passed that was pushed by Governor Inslee that said that the built environment had to reduce the amount of carbon emissions by 70% by 2030. So every 3 years, the state created new energy codes, and you had to get so many points. And initially, what they did is they said, okay, improve things that were really easy, like more insulation. But now we're at a point, so they haven't done a cost benefit analysis of this. They've done all the low hanging fruit items that were inexpensive but made a big impact. Now, the only things that are left are really expensive things like heat recovery ventilators or solar panels, things like that, or 2x8 construction that is incredibly expensive to implement in order to have even more insulation. And so it's so expensive, but you only get this tiny improvement in carbon emission reduction based on less heat being used. And in the meantime, you've got a dwelling that is so tight that people try to play their piano and it doesn't even sound right, that they have to open windows, and there goes all of your savings that you created. So that is driven by the state. And I'm in Olympia today, and that's something I'm going to be talking about is we have a housing crisis, and you got to look at the carbon and climate issues differently, in that there are different things you can do to reduce emissions from our state, which, by the way, is one of the states that has the least emissions. And especially if you compare our state to other countries, I mean, we do very, very well. But the environmental groups are just so very adamant that we not roll that back. But it has absolutely created a housing crisis. Why is it in Georgia you can build a house for 50% of what it costs to build in Washington State? And a lot of it is, yes, our higher wages, but the biggest thing I think is our energy code requirements. And Bruce or Tim could speak to that as well. So anyway, sorry I interrupted there, but I just, we've had lots and lots of conversations about this in the Housing Solutions Committee meeting. And it's been something that, we've asked our legislators to take a stand on. And the situation is that more than half of the legislators are from King County, and they see things differently, and they control our legislature.
Well said and absolutely correct. I would favor going back to 2016 Energy Code. To me, that was the last reasonable energy code. That's sort of the word I get from the development community. But since then, we have been given draconian regulations that have skyrocketed the cost with marginal, if any, benefit that will serve the interest of the community, except to raise the cost and help put us in the position we're in. I don't hold the energy code solely responsible for our housing crisis. There's a whole lot more that goes to it, but it's a big one. We were required as part of our comprehensive plan update to identify barriers to housing. And it was an exercise in irony when you knew in the back of your mind the majority of it was due to regulatory change. But we still, we are making changes. We're looking at zero lot line development standards that could increase the ability to do a condominium scale development, triplex, quadplex type development with shared walls that reduce costs. Suspending our transfer of development rights program, which was intended to protect agricultural lands, but in 30 years of the program's existence, not one TDR has occurred. But it means that the density of zoning in our urban areas is much lower than it could be. So we're missing opportunity to build higher density development, which could create additional housing stock. So there's a range of things within our ability that we are looking at doing. And this in part has come out of the work of the Housing Solutions Committee and other research that we've undertaken to try to hit that target, that need. But they're not wrong. We have a problem. What, and I'll say this concerning RV use, to me, it's a stopgap. To me, it's a temporary fix. We have to figure out as a community and as a country how we're going to house our people in a way that's economically viable. Because before our eyes, we're watching the American dream drift away.
Yeah,
And that's
and
a problem.
I absolutely, and I've been saying to legislators that as they make these standards for new housing more and more expensive, what they're doing is they're driving people into living in RVs and into cars, and that creates even more carbon emissions. If you had taken it back to 2016 code or something, reasonable, then we'd be able to build more. So anyway, this is Housing Solutions Committee and the market rate side of our committee meetings. We all talk about this very regularly and we're all ticked off. So Dr. Sarah Hewling says, what concerns me is not electric vehicles themselves, but the cumulative impact of urban-oriented requirements being applied to rural small-scale housing. Requiring EV charging infrastructure for small family homes in places like Forks increases costs without a demonstrated local need, and over time, these incremental mandates add up. What feels like death by 1,000 cuts for rural property owners.
Exactly.
We agree.
We agree.
Yeah. Sean, you had a point you wanted to make?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, your comments about state level regulations are spot on. And, but there are things in the county level. I can give you an example of a project I'm working on right now. It's a 1 acre parcel in the UGA. And, but a lady wants to divide it. She wants to take a third of an acre out. We've been working with between the county, the city, Dry Creek Water for probably 6, 8 weeks just to determine who can provide water to that property. And then when we find out who can, they can't provide enough water for fire flow. So now we're told we have to put a sprinkler system in. It's going to be on the face of the plat that any residents will need a sprinkler system. So 22 conditions of approval, kind of work our way through that, lots of money invested. And now it's determined that this lady has to put power on the new parcel for final approval, which was never, part of the 22 conditions. So it just these types of things is going to prevent this project from moving forward, another lot for somebody to build on, etc. And that's, in my opinion, from what I haven't had time because I just got that yesterday to determine why that is or if there's a workaround. But these things that just keep going and going and going. And we've been working on this since probably August of last year to get as far as we've gotten. So it's tough.
Sean, it sounds like it's in the UGA, and I know with Amazon, when they were going to build, they wanted to hook up to the PUD power that was on the other side of the road, but it was in the UGA, so they had to get city and county approvals. And the city said, no, you have to bring power from, I don't know how far away it was, but about a mile. And it had to be underground. And so it was going to be close to $1 million instead of $20,000 across the street from Clallam PUD.
Sure. In
So,
our case, it was
yeah,
1,400 feet. If it would have been required to be city, it would have been 1,400 feet underground up to side of the road. And then we were able to get with Dry Creek, and we're down to 300 and some feet, but they
mhm,
don't have enough flow for fire protection, for hydrant pressure. So lots of
mhm,
issues that I think just cost people money and prohibit
yep.
building.
And I feel like we have a crisis today. And so, I know the intention is let's get infrastructure built out for tomorrow, but until some of these things loosen up, I don't know. My perspective is reduce the regulatory requirements and get things built. So anyway, thanks, Sean. One more thing, under the Growth Management Act, the county has flexibility to tailor standards to rural conditions, scale requirements to existing infrastructure, allow exemptions on alternatives and organize codes to reduce cumulative regulatory costs. How is DCD planning to use that flexibilities as these ordinance changes move forward?
Well, that's carefully. The flexibility that seems to be perceived, in my opinion, is eroding. It is being constricted. There were more changes to the Growth Management Act since 2018, or I should say since 2020, than there were from its inception in 1990 through 2020. And all those changes are setting new standards. We have a 56-page checklist from Commerce indicating GMA requirement gap measures that need to be addressed in our comprehensive plan update. These are requirements. These are mandates. Thou shalt do this. Thou shalt do that. So yes, there is flexibility up to a point. And I'm all in favor of it. But I think what Sean raised is probably one of the best things we could do is infrastructure. That's the one thing above all else. The challenge is it's costly. But if we, in concert with the cities in particularly, came up with 30% design for extension of services throughout the unserved portions of the urban growth area, those would be shovel-ready projects available if and when like block grants become available or other infrastructure project fundings become available from the state and federal level. And I do think that that's something we should be doing wholeheartedly, because if we wait for those opportunities to exist, only those jurisdictions who have shovel-ready projects are likely to receive that funding. Occasionally, funding does come along for rural communities, and we would certainly be in line for those. But the more work we do up front makes us ready for those situations that we can take advantage of. That to me would be the biggest bang for the buck.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. So Paul has a question and Tim, and then I think we'll call it a morning. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, thank you. And one of the areas, like say, I mean, Colleen can attest to this, that we are working on infrastructure. When you're looking at the opportunity funds that have, kind of along with what Paul's question, I read Paul's question, and, that we're seeing the development in CQ, we're seeing the development in Carlsberg, the expansion of the sewer, the water system, and they're working with SQUIM on extension of their pump stations. Those sort of like say that the county can, is working on providing the infrastructure. We just, like you say, Colleen, that we need construction code and building energy to come down. Looking at, Dr. Sarah's response, when you have to put over, 1,500 square foot house and you have to put an EV charger to get that, carbon credit that makes it affordable. But you know what? The people don't even own an EV car. But they're putting one in and they're going, okay. So those are areas that the county and the cities are working on trying to improve the infrastructure.
Yep, sorry. So, and Paul had the question, what opportunities for construction of additional housing are or will be offered in the Carlsberg and Clallam Bay CQ urban growth areas?
Like say, if you look
I would say in Clallam Bay CQ, we're expanding the density of residential zoning there in part so that we can meet our housing targets. Under the Growth Management Act, we're required to design zoning around the projected need in the 0 to 30% AMI category, 30 to 50%, 50 to 80, 80 to 120% of AMI household incomes. And that means higher density supplemented projects that can provide living opportunity for folks within those income brackets. Existing zoning, we can't do that. We don't have the density in Clallam Bay CQ. So we're going from the current urban residential high, which is a misstated zone that only allows one home per 12,500 square feet, to the moderate density designation, which is one home per 15 homes per acre. In SQUIM, we're doing similar in a couple of discrete areas where we're going from the SR2 to the SR3, which will double the density from 5 units per acre to 10 units per acre. So that's out of the chute, that's what we're doing. But I think more, creating a broader stimulus will be the policies and regulatory structure for assisted living type developments to be able to target those lower income brackets, and also to eliminate the TDR program. That's going to be a big one. It was a well-intended program, but it's never been used. We'll keep our eye on economic conditions, and if and when we reach that point where it has a chance, we might re-implement it at that point. But we've got other programs that are protecting ag land, like the Conservation Futures, which has been very successful at preserving long-term agricultural land. So I'm confident we're definitely moving the needle. Is it enough? I don't want to be a naysayer, but there's only so much within our ability. Some of these things, the jurisdictions have to get their pocketbook out to address, which I think we all know.
Okay, well, we have hit our mark. It's 9:03. Thank you very much, Bruce, and everyone for joining us. Really good conversation today. I hope it was helpful. It was insightful for me, certainly. So thanks again and have a great day.